Welcome, greetings to you all from a wet and rainy Prague. Here we have the Imperial Russian Army has deployed. As I say, outside of Prague, there is Prague in the distance. Deployed into one gigantic line. 10-pounder Unicorn artillery has deployed behind the main lines. Doubling up as a cross between howitzers and artillery and standard artillery. It is uniquely Russian. Right, we have the French army advancing. We have various units of foot. Artillery and cavalry is holding back. See, my artillery is making a complete mess of actually killing anybody. I don't think we've actually managed to kill anybody. Hitting some militia regiments. Not possibly the best target we could be going for. Some infantry, regular infantry units are coming under fire now. Trouble is we're firing into woodland. Not a brilliant target. My infantry are formed up in one gigantic massive line, as is the way I usually form my Russians up. Intersmixed musketeers and grenadiers all mixed in together. Grenadiers do add a nice touch of ferocity in a line. French General Duroc is now moving across the battlefield to try and rally his troops and make sure his troops don't break. And he's of course now going to get the unbridled opportunity to get shelled by 10-pounder unicorns. Now, for some inexplicable reason, and I've never worked this out, the French seem to like to send their generals out into the middle of no man's land, in range of all my artillery, so I can shell them, and then promptly take no casualties. The French are now going for a repositioning themselves, for a quick re-manoeuvre. Artillery shells are coming in. My artillery, unfortunately, is not that accurate. It is pretty raw artillery. It's only just been raised. General is galloping around in no man's land, he's now starting to take casualties, but not very many, not really. We have some artillery fire in the centre here. Unit of militia are being targeted as everybody else is marching through them. We might as well shell them, and then we'll probably catch everybody else on the way. The French are a mixture of militia and line units, some varying degrees of experience. Russian cavalry is moving up on the flank. Possibly going to be going and taking care of that French artillery. And the French have got a horse battery back here and an 8-pounder battery. Chevalier Lancers are reorganising by the looks of themselves. I'm trying to pull back. Yep, there's the rest of the regiment. My cavalry will probably have to engage those if we want to take care of the artillery. French lines, again, realigning themselves. It's an incredibly wasteful manoeuvre as far as I'm concerned. Certainly not something you should do right in front of the enemy's artillery. Now, here we have my cavalry are moving up to take out his artillery on this flank, and his reinforcements have turned up. Some very experienced horse artillery, which for some reason then probably manages to survive for millennia. 2 cavalry regiments, 2 weakened cavalry regiments. I mean, there's that unit's taken half casualties already from the artillery fire. Meanwhile, we're still shelling his centre. The infantry are taking quite nice casualties. Thank you very much. The cavalry on this flank is now just beginning to manoeuvre around, keeping well clear of his infantry line. But it may actually have been better for me to have menaced his infantry line, forced his infantry to form square, and then shelled the hell out of it. The square does make a gorgeous target for artillery. More manoeuvring by his regiments of foot. A very experienced 27th Regiment of Foot there. You can see my artillery, not the most accurate in the world. Landing a shell in the same field is pretty impressive at the moment. French infantry are deploying. Still. Mixture of militia and regular regiments of foot. Now, my cavalry has gone in for the charge. Being a counter charge from the French Lancers. Now I have 2 regiments of hussars. I will try and wheel 1 regiment into the fight and 1 regiment into the artillery. Now, that gun battery is still limbered, so it won't actually be doing anything in this fight very much, apart from dying. His artillery, I do manage to catch his artillery before he manages to fire off a second shot, which would be fantastic, because the last thing I actually want to happen is for him to fire a grape shot, point blank range, into my artillery. This regiment of horse artillery is doing nothing, it's just being kept in reserve. My hussars against his lancers. Initially it should be his advantage, but in the long term it will be an advantage for hussars. Lancers are good shock troops for an initial attack, but tend to suffer somewhat in a prolonged combat. My chaps are the ones in red, under the pointy stabby sticks. Those are the lancers. My cavalry are finishing them off. Lancers do not do well long term. Back here, now as I said before, I do have this experienced unit of French artillery, which is taking forever to die. Artillery fire coming down now, still into the French lines. They are desperately trying to weaken these French lines, weaken the French regiments. Oh, that was a beautiful shot. I say that was a jolly good shot. We did like that one. That worked rather well. Occasionally you will get beautiful shots like that where you just plonk a howitzer shell into about 60 or 70 men and get a first spot on target. Again, another hit that went in there. Now my cavalry here at the rear. My hussars have finished off his cavalry. That's his cavalry on this wing finished, and his chevaliers have retreated, but unfortunately my cavalry now really doesn't have the strength to do very much. This hussar regiment, however, is still pretty strong, and by the looks of it is going to go and give somebody a bad day. And we do have some militia regiments here. Militia can't form square. Do have to hope that I retrained my guns onto something else. Militia can't form square, so they're fantastically good for charging into with cavalry, particularly from the rear. The militia didn't like that, and that's broken them already. And another attack here by my cavalry into the back of the militia. They didn't respond, aren't going to respond to that either particularly well. The militia regiment's now trying to realign to gain some kind of firepower. I must get my hussars still fairly strong. They're now taking casualties from crossfire from two regiments of foot. The hussars here are just chasing off that unit of militia. Now hussars, being somewhat death or glory troops, have now gone into this fight, which is unfortunate because my artillery is shelling this unit, which is very unfortunate. My cavalry do break at this point. Being stabbed by French bayonets is one thing, having your own artillery shell you, and it's kind of a different kettle of fish altogether. Over here, just to point out that the artillery that wouldn't die has now died, thankfully. In the centre we have the remnants of that horse artillery battery. Half of it managed to get away. French lines are reforming, but I have smashed two regiments of militia foot, which is quite handy. Artillery now coming down on this unit of militia here. That regiment of militia has effectively is effectively out of the battle. This regiment here is going to start trying to pour fire into my hussars, who have taken a breather. They are somewhat tired. But for the loss of two cavalry regiments, I have destroyed two militia regiments, a battery and a half of artillery, a cavalry regiment. Well, it seems to me to be quite a decent exchange. That regiment of foot is taking heavy casualties, down to 93 men. I really should put some shells into that regiment. Now his horse artillery is unlimbering in the woods. Let's get in there and have a look at them. They are unlimbering in the woods, which is somewhat unfortunate because this means they're going to start shelling my troops, which is the entire reason I sent the cavalry in the first place. My hussars fall back, and this militia regiment is going to try and take on my musketeers. Now it's a fairly even fight numerically, but I've got artillery on my side, and I'm better trained troops than standard militia, so odds are once I manoeuvre myself to get a better angle on the French, I will actually win this fight. The trouble is the militia can do an awful lot of damage to me in the meantime. Yep, here come my troops redeploying. See the blue squares, blue lines where they are redeploying. Artillery fire coming in, yet still on those militia. Those militia are not going to be a serious problem anymore. This artillery, however, could be. There's only 2 guns, but they're quite close. Well, we still have shelling going on. Heavy shelling. I've Jaegers deployed, ready to break up any attack. Jaegers to the front there, and they do have Jaegers here, moving forwards. Now the Jaegers are going to try and entice the foot infantry to come in and attack. We really do need them to make their foot attack. I mean, I could attack as well, but I like to make the opponent attack. Now he does still have a regiment of chasseurs à cheval, which are light cavalry. Carbine armed light cavalry. Capable of firing from the saddle or switching to straightforward melee attack. But I also have a regiment and a half of cavalry still on this flank. Firefight going on between the Russians. Russians are still manoeuvring between the Russians and the French militia. Still manoeuvring round. Now the French are down to 138 to my 151. Again, I am slightly better troops. I do have slightly better morale. I should, in theory, do a lot better. Now, unbeknownst to me, in here, there's some cavalry in here. I don't know this. I can't just wander in here and start seeing all these dead horses. And it's not just the gun teams that are dying. There are horses in places there shouldn't be, like here. Those are cavalry horses because they've got carbines. There's a cavalry regiment in here, but it's hidden inside the woods. French artillery, Russian artillery is pounding in on the French, but it's not able to break them yet. Now, this firefight on the flank here is still continuing. It's almost a completely separate fight. 130 of my troops to 116 militia. I can see the militia off. They probably will cause so many casualties that I will actually be forced to withdraw the regiment for fear of losing it completely. But then I remember I have some hussars, not many, but I do have some hussars. The hussar regiment that broke, by the way, I did manage to rally it. So I do have 2 units of hussars on this flank. Hussars are somewhat death and glory troops. Basically, a hussar who survives past his 5th year is not trying hard enough. Or so that I have read. And will we see the the Russian cavalry charge into that flank? And how much damage can a cavalry charge do to a flank? Reloading, ramming rods, ramming home, cover and ball. Not going to have it or completely their own way. Russian cavalry has launched its attack against the artillery up here. We need to silence these guns. If we silence these guns, so there are the chasseurs à cheval firing. The artillery do get off a shot against my cavalry and take out a huge number of men suddenly. I do lose a large number of men. The chasseurs à cheval are going to give me an awful big problem. And here comes my cavalry charge. Unfortunately, we missed it to cover that big cavalry charge. Cavalry charge into the flank of the French militia. That's enough for them, thank you very much. They're out of there. My line should now realign. Artillery fire still going in against the French. Now moving the Jaegers in to engage the French line. The French line is now moving forwards. Jaegers are marksmen, not as well trained as, say, the 95th Rifles. More on the par of Prussian Fusiliers or French Chasseurs. All performing the same sort of job, a skirmishing screen for the main army. Another unit over here, ready to move. Now here we have Russian army, 18 hussars against 46 chasseurs à cheval. That can only end one way. Unless I get incredibly lucky. Right. Jaegers have fallen back to just in front of my line. The French are manoeuvring to try and take out those Jaegers. French don't like light infantry or Jaegers. Jaegers are going to, I think, call it a day and fall back in a minute. They Jaegers don't like being shot at very much either, but they are in the woods. They are capable of inflicting nice casualties on the French. A little Jaeger unit, does decide to leave. My cavalry up here is now routing. French cavalry, they do have half a regiment left. French cavalry is pulling back to reposition itself. Massive attack in the centre. We've got 4 regiments of French infantry coming up in the centre. Now this is a beautiful target for artillery. If I can get the artillery fire right, it'll be beautiful. If I get it wrong, I'll blow my own troops into pieces. French and Russian infantry are now beginning to engage in musket fire. As you can see here, we have Russian infantry starting to re-manoeuvre. French are reacting, but they're also now being fired upon by the Jaegers. Jaegers are engaging this regiment of foot. Unfortunately, my Jaegers are now charged in the flank and rear by French cavalry. This is somewhat of a disaster. It is possibly the second best target for cavalry. Light infantry are, particularly in skirmish order, are renowned for being prone to suffering badly against light infantry. Now the Russians have formed square. The 4th Grenadier Square Regiment has formed squares. Is now trying to hide from this French cavalry, which is hiding in the woods with the artillery. 5th Foot decided to face the combat in line. Now let's see what's happening in the centre. The Russians are holding the centre quite comfortably. The French have taken horrendous casualties throughout the battle, being softened up by artillery. The Jaegers are actually still steady. They're actually managing to retreat rather than charge. Chasseurs de Cheval are very tired. Not great on the morale front either. I think this is where we see the Russian Jaegers fall back behind the main body of the infantry. Artillery coming in still against the Russians, from the Russians. Chasseurs de Cheval on this flank are trying to pour in some fire against the foot troops. The foot troops will win this fight. That was an artillery shell that went horribly wrong, I believe. These unicorn-stroke howitzers do not like firing at close range. It is something that is particularly dangerous and is a very good way of actually getting yourselves killed. Chasseurs de Cheval charging in against my line. This isn't going to end one way. Charging around, firing from horseback is all very well, but stopping in front of a line infantry regiment to fire, not a smart move. Through the French infantry. The remnants of that cavalry unit are now routing, and very experienced French 15th Regiment of Line. Fusiliers de Ligne. Engaging in a firefight with the Russians. Unfortunately, I have 1, 2, 3 Russian regiments that can open fire on them, and they've already taken over 100 casualties already. Temporarily pause the game while we just have a quick look around. The majority of the French are now in retreat. So artillery battery is still firing in the centre. I think what we're going to need to do now is move up the Russian infantry. Russian infantry are actually moving up. 3rd and 4th Regiment of Musketeers. I'll have to bayonet charge that woodland, I think. As you can see from the minimap, pretty much guaranteed that the only pretty much able to see the only unit left fighting for the French is this regiment of horse artillery. Now they do have under this regiment of foot. These regiments over here are under heavy fire. They are taking severe casualties. This does look like to me Prague is mine. I cannot lose. As it was said, Gott mit uns. 3rd Stonewall Regiment of Foot. Fantastic. This Regiment of Foot actually held out down to about 40 men against multiple Janissary attacks in a couple of battles. Unfortunately, I didn't save them. But this regiment did actually hold an entire right wing all by itself, or stood behind a stone wall. If you find stone walls, use them. They are actually worth having. Right, I'm going to call it a day. Thank you very much. I've been Havoc. This was the Battle of Prague. The Russians did march in. Thank you very much. Catch you next time.